I didn't think I would ever be asked to do an investiture.
Behind Windsor's gilded doors, a private gathering was convened that few were meant to witness. The invitations had been dispatched with deliberate precision, their reach limited, their omissions more telling than their inclusions. Those who were summoned felt the weight of secrecy pressing down upon them as they entered the castle's hushed halls. Those left out of the guest list were left to wonder in silence why their presence had been deemed unnecessary. It was no ordinary evening, no ceremonial dinner, no benign discussion of duties. This was the night the monarchy's future would be tested, and everyone seated around that table knew it, even if no one dared to breathe the truth aloud. The silence of the corridors was suffocating, thick with unspoken fears. Every tick of the clock echoed with dread, as though time itself had slowed to witness the inevitable collision that was about to unfold. Camilla entered with the air of certainty, a queen consort who had weathered storms before and who believed she had finally cemented her authority within the walls that had once excluded her. Her step was measured, her demeanor polished, her eyes alive with the confidence of someone who thought she had nothing left to prove. To her, the evening belonged to her narrative, one she believed she had carefully shaped over years of persistence. Yet across the table, her gaze landed on a presence that refused to bend Princess Anne. She did not move much, nor did she speak, but the stillness she radiated carried a power all its own. She sat with quiet resolve, her papers clutched with precision at her side, her eyes sharper than steel. There was no mistaking her purpose. She was not there to blend into the shadows. She was there to drag the shadows into the light. William shifted in his seat, his restless energy betraying the storm that brewed within him. His eyes flickered toward Anne and then toward Camilla, torn between the loyalty demanded of him and the unease rising, like fire in his chest. Edward sat more quietly, his stillness a mask, though it did little to conceal the tension etched across his face. Both men could feel the air growing heavier with each passing moment, a storm gathering that none of them could prevent. It was as though the very walls of Windsor themselves were aware that history was about to be rewritten. The grandeur of the setting only heightened the dread. Gilded frames and velvet drapes could not soften the truth of what was coming. Every glance exchanged carried meaning. Every silence spoke louder than words. This was not a family gathering, not a routine meeting to discuss ceremonial duties or upcoming appearances. This was a reckoning, a moment suspended between calm and eruption. Each royal present seemed to brace themselves, as if waiting for the ground beneath them to shift. Camilla, for all her confidence, did not notice the deliberate calm in Anne's posture, nor did she recognize how dangerous it was. Anne was not a woman given to dramatics. She did not speak unless necessary. But when she chose her moment, it was devastating. And that moment was fast approaching. For while Camilla sat with the smug assurance of victory, Anne's silence was a weapon, sharper than any spoken word. The atmosphere in the room was not merely tense, it was suffocating, the air thick with expectation. It was the kind of silence that trembled with secrets, a silence that held within it the power to destroy. But silence has a way of cracking when truth is too heavy to hide, and Anne was about to lift the veil on a plot no one dared confront. What began as whispers now erupted into the open. With calm precision, Anne's voice pierced the air, unraveling weeks of rumors that had lingered like shadows in the palace corridors. Her words were not vague warnings, nor the idle murmurs of suspicion. They were sharp, deliberate, and damning. Each syllable landed with the weight of authority, cutting through the tension like a blade. As she named the first threads of Camilla's secret web, the silence cracked, and gasps echoed through the chamber, rippling through those who realized they were standing on the edge of revelation. Anne began by exposing the subtle patterns of manipulation that had crept into the palace's inner workings, patterns dismissed for too long as coincidence. Letters had gone astray, messages redirected, documents disappearing only to reappear with quiet alterations. They were small details on the surface, yet Anne revealed them as part of a carefully constructed design. Nothing had been left to chance. Even ceremonial protocols, Those centuries-old customs that carried the weight of history had been tampered with, bent to favor Camilla's image and her family's presence. Seating charts once rooted in tradition now bore quiet signs of interference. Speeches that should have highlighted the heirs of Elizabeth had been reshaped to emphasize Camilla's growing influence. These were not accidents. They were calculated moves, stitched together into a tapestry of control. Her voice, steady but unrelenting, then turned to the loyalty tests. Staff who once served the monarchy as an institution had been pressed into silent choices. Some were forced to declare their allegiance not to the crown, but to Camilla herself. Those who complied found themselves in favor, their careers advancing in ways that seemed suspiciously smooth. Those who resisted, who clung to the integrity of their oath, were quietly sidelined. Their responsibilities diminished, their voices muted until they faded from relevance. It was conquest by silence, a slow erosion of trust carried out in corridors no one dared to question. Anne's words drew the room into deeper unease as she unveiled how Camilla's family had been woven into this machinery. Appearances at public events, once rare, had become routine. What the world saw as inclusion was in truth a deliberate strategy to normalize their PD8 presence within royal life. Their faces began appearing beside the true heirs of the crown, not by coincidence, but by deliberate orchestration. Invitations once reserved for those born into the bloodline were restructured so that Camilla's descendants stood in places they had no rightful claim to occupy. The monarchy's rhythm, its very heartbeat, had been shifted without anyone realizing until now. William's jaw tightened as the implications became clear. His children, George, Charlotte, and Louis, were the ones being quietly displaced. The legacy of his grandmother and the memory of his mother stood in the crosshairs of this calculated manipulation. He leaned forward, his restlessness betraying the storm within him. The realization was more than political, it was personal, a direct attack on the future he was sworn to protect. Across the table, Edward lowered his eyes, his discomfort written across his face, as if bracing for a blow he could no longer deny was coming. And yet, Charles sat frozen, his silence louder than any defense. To speak in Camilla's favor would be to betray the crown. To remain still was to betray his wife. The weight of that conflict paralyzed him. His presence diminished in the very room where his authority should have reigned supreme. His crown felt fragile, his reign already undermined by the revelations that his own sister now laid bare. The chamber grew heavier with each word Anne delivered, her calm tone carrying the force of inevitability. This was no longer speculation, it was exposure. The monarchy's unity was fracturing under the truth, and those seated at the table felt the ground shift beneath their feet. Yet, Anne had only begun. For within her sealed envelope lay evidence that would transform whispers into undeniable proof. When Anne slid the sealed envelope across the table, time itself seemed to stop. No longer whispers, no longer accusations, the truth was written in ink. Inside those papers lay the blueprint of Camilla's plan, a scheme so precise it left the monarchy gasping for breath. Every eye followed the envelope, as if it carried the weight of destiny itself. The stillness of the chamber deepened, broken only by the rustle of Anne's steady hands unfolding the contents within. The calm in her demeanor masked the storm she was about to unleash, and with each line revealed, the room edged closer to collapse. The first set of documents exposed financial trusts and estates, quietly redirected away from the rightful heirs. Properties meant to safeguard the continuity of the crown were being funneled into channels that led toward Camilla's bloodline. What appeared at first as routine adjustments in estate management revealed themselves as carefully disguised seizures, subtle shifts that, when viewed together, formed a chilling pattern. Accounts established to preserve royal stability had been twisted into tools of silent takeover. The magnitude of the betrayal hit like thunder, for these were not mere errors, they were orchestrations, designed with precision. Anne's voice never faltered, as she drew attention to the memorandum tucked among the papers. Its language was deliberate in its ambiguity, blurring the boundaries of succession in ways that seemed harmless on the surface, yet sinister upon closer reading. The wording suggested possibilities where none should exist. crafting loopholes that could open the throne's influence to Camilla's descendants. It was a quiet attempt to bend centuries of tradition into something pliable, flexible enough to favor her family. Though not law, the memorandum carried an intention so dangerous it sent chills down the spines of those who read it. Then came the letters of private exchanges between Camilla and high-ranking advisors. Their tone was cold, transactional, stripped of sentiment. They did not speak of loyalty or service, but of leverage, opportunity, and control. In those lines, Anne exposed a strategy that positioned Camilla's circle as indispensable while quietly diminishing the authority of the heirs. These were not the words of a woman supporting her husband's reign. They were the directives of someone determined to cement her family's hold on the monarchy itself. As William scanned the documents, his composure cracked. His children's names, George, Charlotte, and Louis, appeared in contexts no father should ever have to endure. They were not mentioned as the future of the crown, but as obstacles to be managed, bypassed, and overshadowed. The betrayal was visceral. His jaw tightened, his fists curled, his entire body trembling with fury. He could no longer see this as an abstract conspiracy. It was personal. It was his children, their birthright, their destiny being threatened in black and white. Across the table, Charles looked as if the crown upon his head had grown unbearably heavy, his face drained of color, his silence louder than denial. To defend his wife would be to condemn his reign. To acknowledge the truth would be to admit that betrayal had been living by his side all along. The conflict hollowed him, reducing the king to a shadow, torn between crown and love, between duty and personal loyalty. His silence, his paralysis, betrayed the weight of a monarch already cornered by truth. The air thickened with dread, the very foundations of the monarchy trembling beneath the weight of Anne's revelations. She had not simply exposed manipulation. She had revealed a plot that reached into the heart of succession, inheritance, and legacy. Every word she spoke, every document she revealed, stripped away the illusion of coincidence and left only deliberate betrayal. But Anne wasn't done, because the most haunting voice in this battle came not from the living, but from the queen who had ruled before them. Anne's hand trembled not with fear, but with reverence, as she unfolded a private letter from Queen Elizabeth II. Its words were never intended for public eyes, never meant to echo through a room heavy with betrayal and tension. Yet tonight, they were being summoned from the silence of the past, carrying with them a prophecy that rang like thunder through Windsor's halls. In that instant, the air grew heavier, for the presence of the late queen was felt in every corner. It was as though her voice, her judgment, and her authority had returned to preside over the reckoning her daughter now delivered. The letter was not long, but its clarity was devastating. Elizabeth had written of the dangers of hidden ambition, of the corrosive power that could rise when personal desire outpaced duty. She spoke of shadows within the family itself, reminding those who followed her that the monarchy's survival would demand vigilance, even among their own blood. It was not addressed to anyone by name, yet the weight of its warning fell unmistakably upon Camilla. Each sentence carried the unmistakable wisdom of a sovereign who had guided Britain through 7 decades, and in this moment, her foresight sounded less like caution and more like judgment fulfilled. The words struck William hardest of all. As Anne's voice carried the Queen's message, memories surged within him of nights when his grandmother guided him through his grief after Diana's death, moments when she reminded him of the burden and the purpose of his destiny. Now, hearing Elizabeth's foresight echo in the very chamber where betrayal was laid bare, his grief collided with fury. His eyes brimmed with fire and sorrow, the sting of knowing that his grandmother had seen what he could not, that she had sensed the storm building even as he trusted silence to hold it back. Camilla, for the first time that evening, faltered visibly. Her confidence, so carefully displayed when she entered, crumbled under the weight of Elizabeth's authority. No defense could shield her from the late Queen's words. Denial sounded hollow when placed against the wisdom of a monarch revered by millions. Her hands clenched, her face pale, her composure slipping with every passing line. It was no longer Anne alone who accused her. It was Elizabeth's judgment from beyond the grave. Charles sat stricken, his silence more painful than any outburst. He had always looked to his mother as a guide, her approval of the measure of his choices even when unspoken. Now, confronted by her warning, he was forced to reckon with the truth he had long refused to see. His heart wavered between loyalty to the woman he loved and the responsibility of the crown he had sworn to protect. The torment etched into his face betrayed a man caught in a struggle he could no longer conceal. Elizabeth had seen it, Anne had exposed it, and Charles was left powerless beneath the crushing weight of it all. Anne folded the letter slowly, her voice cutting through the suffocating silence. She declared Elizabeth's words not as advice, but as a verdict. Her mother had seen this danger long before it revealed itself, and tonight, her warning carried the force of law. Camilla's ambition was not just a suspicion, it was a threat, condemned by the very queen who had once held the monarchy together. But even Elizabeth's words could not prepare the room for the theft Anne would expose next to the jewels of Diana and the treasures of the crown. When Anne revealed the fate of Diana's heirlooms, the chamber erupted. This was no longer about politics or power, it was about memory, legacy, and betrayal. For within Camilla's carefully concealed schemes lay the shocking attempt to strip Diana's children of what rightfully belonged to them. The jewels that once symbolized the grace and tragedy of a princess lost too soon had nearly been redirected into the hands of a bloodline with no rightful claim. Gasps turned to murmurs, and murmurs to outrage, as the enormity of the revelation came crashing down on the room like a storm. Anne's voice carried the weight of evidence too precise to be dismissed. The documents said plainly, arrangements had been set in motion to transfer pieces of Diana's collection, jewels that carried not only value, but an emotional connection that no monetary figure could measure. Rings, tiaras, and tokens of her memory. The very items that should one day pass to George, Charlotte, and Louis had nearly been diverted into Camilla's family line. What had once been hidden under the guise of administrative adjustments was now revealed as deliberate interference. This was no oversight. It was a theft of history itself, and it was not only Diana's memory under threat. The private heirlooms of Elizabeth, treasures meant to remain within the direct bloodline, were similarly at risk. Estates tied to centuries of tradition, artifacts that bore the silent testimony of monarchs long gone, all were caught in the crosshairs of Camilla's quiet ambition. What should have been safeguarded for the heirs of Elizabeth had been maneuvered into places where they could vanish from royal legacy altogether. The betrayal was staggering, a wound not only to the family, but to the nation's sense of continuity. Catherine's face, though composed, carried the devastation of realization. For her, these were not simply jewels. They were fragments of Diana's presence, pieces that carried her spirit forward. To imagine them lost, absorbed into hands that had no link to Diana's sacrifice, was unbearable. She thought of her children, of the stories she would tell them one day about their grandmother. And now, in that chamber, she understood how close they had come to losing those tangible connections forever. Her silence screamed louder than words, a grief too deep to be spoken. William, however, could not contain his fury. His restraint shattered as he rose, his voice breaking through the chaos with raw intensity. To him, this was not about documents or legal maneuvering. This was about his mother, the woman whose life had been defined by pain and sacrifice, whose memory he had sworn to protect. To see her legacy reduced to a bargaining chip, her treasures treated like currency in Camilla's pursuit of permanence, was intolerable. His anger was not political, it was visceral, deeply human, and filled with the weight of love and loss. The mere mention of Diana's name silenced the room, cutting deeper than any accusation. For a moment, even those who sought to defend Camilla could not deny the brutality of what had been uncovered. The memory of Diana lingered like a ghost in that chamber, her absence more powerful than presence, reminding everyone that the monarchy's story was written not just in crowns and titles, but in the pain of those who had suffered for it. The eruption was immediate and uncontrollable. Accusations collided with denials. Some cried out in disbelief, others demanded explanations, but unity fractured under the weight of Anne's revelations. Loyalties that had once been unspoken now cracked into visible lines, dividing the family before each other's eyes. The monarchy, which had fought so hard to present an image of stability, now lay exposed in disarray, its fractures raw and undeniable. But Anne still held the sharpest weapon of all, Camilla's own voice, captured in secret, exposing her plot in cold, undeniable terms. The room froze as Anne placed a small device on the table. Every breath caught, every movement stilled, as though the walls themselves leaned closer to hear. And then, it happened. Camilla's voice filled the chamber, unguarded, stripped of the polish she wore in public. Her words carried no veil of loyalty, no echo of service to the crown or country. Instead, they revealed calculation, ambition, and an unflinching desire to secure the monarchy for her bloodline. The sound of her cold, deliberate tone reverberated like a hammer against glass, shattering any illusion of innocence. Windsor's walls, steeped in centuries of history, now shook with betrayal. The recording was not vague, it was damning. In her own cadence, Camilla spoke of strategies to edge William's children aside, of maneuvers to ensure her descendants would not merely participate in royal life, but dominate its future. The room listened in stunned silence, as she detailed her intent with a precision that left no room for doubt. It was not the language of chance, nor the fumblings of a misinterpreted conversation. It was deliberate, unflinching, and devastating in its clarity. Each word cut deeper, driving wedges of disbelief into the hearts of those who once trusted her. Gasps broke the silence, rippling around the table as reality struck like lightning. Denials offered earlier crumbled instantly under the weight of her own voice. The strength she had carried for years, the image she had constructed with care, began to collapse in front of everyone. What had been speculation was now undeniable truth. There was no defense strong enough to survive her own confession, captured and replayed for those who had once turned a blind eye. Camilla's composure broke for the first time. Her voice rose, desperate, insisting that the recording was taken out of context, that she had been misunderstood, forced into conversations she never wanted to have. She pleaded with eyes that darted around the room, searching for even a shred of sympathy. But the more she tried to twist the meaning of her own words, the more hollow her defense sounded. Panic spilled from her, and the desperation that seeped into her tone revealed the unraveling of a woman who had believed herself untouchable. Charles sat motionless, shattered by what he was forced to hear. For years, he had defended her against criticism, fought for her place, demanded that the world accept her at his side. And now, her voice betrayed not only him, but the monarchy itself. His silence was suffocating, his shoulders bent under the realization that the woman he had trusted above all others had been scheming in the downers. Shadows. The weight of his mother's warning, the sting of Anne's revelations, and the sound of his wife's unmasked ambition crushed him. His reign, already fragile, now trembled on the edge of collapse. William's fury, simmering through every moment of the confrontation, ignited into finality. His voice, firm and unyielding, cut through the chaos like a blade. "This ends now." The words were not shouted, yet they carried more force than anger could ever achieve. They were a verdict, a declaration, a vow. He was not merely speaking as a son or as a father, but as the future of the monarchy itself. And in that moment, his resolve was undeniable. But as the storm raged, Anne knew the monarchy's survival depended on what happened next, the reckoning that would redraw power forever. The chamber dissolved into a storm of voices, accusations, tears, and fury clashing like thunder. For the first time, the family confronted Camilla head-on, and the verdict was no longer whispered. It was shouted across Windsor's walls. What had been simmering for years, buried beneath forced smiles and polished appearances, now erupted in unrestrained chaos. The silence Anne had broken could not be restored, and the monarchy, once cloaked in the illusion of unity, stood exposed in its rawest form. William was the first to rise above the cacophony, his voice trembling with the force of grief and rage. He invoked the memory of Diana not as a ghost of the past, but as the heartbeat of the present. His words cut through the uproar like steel. His children's legacy would not be erased, their birthright would not be stolen, and his mother's memory would not be trampled under ambition. He spoke with the fury of a son who had carried wounds too long, and with the resolve of a father determined to protect what Diana had given her life to secure. His vow electrified the room, leaving even those who doubted Anne shaken to their core. Anne, unyielding, pressed forward with her demand for accountability. She did not shout, nor did she falter. Her words were sharp and deliberate, spoken with the authority of a guardian who understood the weight of tradition. She declared that this was no longer about personal rivalries, but about the very survival of the monarchy itself. Her composure made her words hit harder, her strength drawing others into her orbit. In that moment, she was no longer merely a sister or a daughter, she became the anchor of a crumbling institution. Camilla, however, was cornered. The polished calm she had worn like armor shattered under the relentless blows of truth and fury. Her voice cracked, her explanations fell flat, and her attempts at denial dissolved in the storm. She was no longer the queen consort commanding the room, but a woman, stripped of power, caught in a web of her own making. Every word she tried to utter was drowned by the rising chorus against her. Her influence, once wielded with quiet precision, shattered before the eyes of those who had once defended her. A few royals tried to speak in her defense, clinging to fragments of loyalty or perhaps blinded by fear of what the truth would mean for them. Yet their words were weak, wavering, drowned out by the stronger voices aligning with Anne and William. The tide had turned, and it became clear that the balance of power was shifting before their very eyes. For every half-hearted defense of Camilla, there were voices that called for the truth to be faced without hesitation. Charles remained silent, his body heavy, his expression vacant. He was a king undone, broken by the collision of love and duty. His silence betrayed his torment, for he could not defend his wife without condemning his reign, and he could not support Anne without destroying the woman he had fought for all his life. His crown, once a symbol of stability, now seemed like a burden too heavy for him to carry. In his silence, he appeared diminished, a monarch reduced to the role of a bystander. The crown's unity collapsed in that chamber, the fracture lines too deep to conceal. What the world believed was an unshakable institution was, in truth, a family divided, torn apart by ambition, betrayal, and grief. Anne's revelations had ripped the veil away, and the storm that followed left no chance of returning to what once was. And when the storm finally broke, silence revealed the new order, a monarchy forever changed by one sister's courage. As the dust settled, one name echoed across Britain with pride: Princess Anne, the sister who spoke when others stayed silent, the guardian who saved the monarchy from betrayal. Her revelations had not just exposed Camilla, they had redrawn the lines of power forever. Across the nation, whispers transformed into applause, headlines carried her defiance, and the people, long starved for a figure of integrity, found themselves rallying around her with a reverence that surprised even those within the palace. What Anne had done was more than reveal a plot. She had restored a sense of faith in tradition itself, proving that courage still resided within the crown's bloodline. In the wake of the storm, William and Catherine emerged, transformed. Their grief, their fury, and their shock had hardened into resolve. No longer could they afford the luxury of trust without vigilance. Their focus sharpened, their purpose crystallized. Protecting their children's legacy was no longer a quiet duty carried out behind palace walls, it became the defining mission of their lives. The betrayal had scarred them, but it had also steeled them. They carried themselves with the strength of parents who had been reminded, in the harshest possible way, that their children's destiny would always be under threat unless they stood as its shield. Charles, meanwhile, walked the halls of Windsor as a diminished man. He wore the crown, yet its weight bent him lower with every passing day. The haunting words of his mother's prophetic warning echoed in his conscience, pressing upon him the reality he had refused to face. The betrayal of his wife was no longer speculation. It was exposed in full view, undeniable and damning. He lived not only with the judgment of his sister, but with the shadow of Elizabeth's voice, warning him from beyond the grave. His reign continued, but it was fragile, weakened, and scarred by the revelations that had torn through the family. He was no longer seen as the unshakable figurehead of the monarchy, but as a man who had failed to see what others had sacrificed everything to confront. Camilla, once untouchable, now found herself cast into isolation. Whispers followed her down every corridor. Her influence dissolved into suspicion, her confidence dismantled by the truth laid bare. Where she once walked with authority, now she moved beneath a cloud of mistrust. Every gesture, every word, was scrutinized, her position hollowed by the revelations Anne had forced into the open. She had fought for decades to secure her place beside the crown, but in one night, her ambitions had been shattered, her legacy rewritten in the ink of betrayal. Around them, alliances shifted like sand. Those who once aligned themselves with Camilla retreated, eager to distance themselves from her collapse. New bonds formed instead, drawn to the strength of Anne and the resolve of William. The monarchy had fractured, but in the breaking, new lines of loyalty emerged. A new order took shape, one that carried the scars of betrayal, but also the promise of renewal. Anne, who had never sought glory, now stood as its unlikely guardian, her presence a reminder that even in its darkest moments, the crown could still defend itself from within. The monarchy was scarred, yes, but it was also reborn, and at the heart of that rebirth was Anne, the sister who dared to speak, the daughter who upheld her mother's warning, the woman who stood when no one else would. Across Britain and beyond, the refrain echoed, "Bravo, Princess Anne." It was not merely applause, it was recognition. It was gratitude. It was history marking the moment when courage rose above deceit. Yet even as Anne's triumph echoes, one truth lingers. Ambition never dies quietly. It waits in the shadows for its next chance to strike. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.